I don't know if they heard you.
Hello, welcome to Happy Story. We're going to be reading a story and the Bible, everyone. Yeah,
We're gonna start.
Bible.
Ow!
Yeah.
Hurt my elbow.
If Dad moves his head a little bit, yeah. You were confused by the last episode. I'm actually Super, and this is Under Armour.
Super Under Armour.
Oh, and Never-Ending Story.
Last
book we read, right now.
Hi, watcher number 1. Thank you. All right. So, we're on the last 2 chapters of the book of Daniel now. And I'm going to get started. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. I think that was probably a link that somebody sent. Okay, so this is kind of long, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for the second person who's present. Please post a comment in the comments so I know who you are. All right, Daniel chapter 11, English Standard Version of the Bible. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Then the king of the south shall be called strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and center the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be excited, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up sledge works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give them the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand to be to his advantage. Afterward, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Then shall arise in this place one who shall send an extractor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. At the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action, and the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind. with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall come into countries, and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and of the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. Chapter 12, the time of the end. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who were wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this bank of the stream, and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, oh my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? He said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of these days. That is the end of the book of Daniel. However, I'm thinking tomorrow I'm going to go ahead and read chapters 13 and 14, which, as I said before, are not canonical. So, but they are still interesting to read. So, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and send it over to Mom so she can read the Anne McCaffrey. I think Menoli is going to learn how to play that harp or the guitar, whatever it is. Sorry, I do pay attention.
Just a second.
Oh.
Alexa wondering. Oh, okay, guys. Been a bit of a long day here. Chapter 99? Chapter 6. That's chapter 7. Okay. I love this part of the book. Okay. It's right? Chapter 6 is okay. The tears I feel today I'll wait to shed tomorrow, though I'll not sleep this night, nor find succour from sorrow. My eyes must keep their sight, I dare not be tear-blinded. I must be free to talk, no, not choke with grief, clear-minded. My mouth cannot betray the anguish that I know. Yes, I'll keep my tears till later, but my grief will never go. Meneley's Song for Petrium. I wanted to give a little synopsis. So, Meneley's first day at the Harpocraft Hall was kind of wild. Dunka, her cot mistress, I think that's the right word. Anyway, she has it in for her. And she didn't tell her the message from Siebel about where she's supposed to be in the morning. And she woke up, I can't remember if she woke up or went to bed or all of the above, to like lots of scoldings. I think she went to bed the night before Dunka got in, and then so she woke up in the morning and there was all this scolding and hoo-ha and blah. And then when she got back that night, there was more scolding and all she could, I think, somebody set me right. Yes, more scolding. And mentally realized that she will never get on Dunka's good side, and that all the girls, except for possibly, what's her name, are against her. Oh, wait, I just saw it. Oh, Adiva. All the girls seem to be like they're against her. She really likes Pimer. Pimer and Chemo are helping her feed the fire lizards twice a day. The Siebel picked her brain about fishing and how to be a fisherman and all that stuff, and is going to try to get her to teach him to sail, but he won't tell her why. And the Harper is kind of going to be in and out, and so he's put her in charge of the eggs, for the fire lizard eggs, for a few days. And they're fixing to hatch in a couple of days too. She totally outplayed the rest of the girls in her cot for a first period, so to speak. And she has seen most of the Harper Masters. And she doesn't really know where she stands, and she's kind of in and out, up and down. Like this last chapter, she was like, "I'll never amount to anything," and then she was like, "That's not true. I will, and I will succeed, and everybody else can just go, what do you say? Sit on tack, kick rocks." Okay. So the next day, Beauty woke her at sunrise. The other fire lizards were awake too, though one thing was sure, no one else in the cot was awake yet. Okay. Wow. Granny Bear said wow. What was the wow? Did I say something bad? Okay. Last night, when Meneley had reached the relative safety of her room, she had closed and barred the door, and then opened the shutters to admit her friends. She had recovered her composure by oiling their patchy skin with Master Oldive's salve. This was the first opportunity she'd had since they'd left the cave by the dragon stones to tend and fondle each other. They, too, were communicative. She got many impressions from them, mostly that they'd been bathing daily in the lakes above Fort Hold, which weren't much fun because there weren't any waves to sport in. Meneley caught pictures from their minds of great dragons and of a weir, differing in shape from Bendon. Beauty's pictures were the sharpest. Meneley had enjoyed her quiet evening with them. It had made up for Dunka's irrational attitudes. Now, as she became aware of the early morning stillness, she knew she'd have time to do a few tasks for herself. She could get a bath and wash the fruit stains out of her tunic. It ought to dry quickly on the window ledge in the morning sun. There should be time before threadfall, for she remembered that would occur today. Quietly she unbarred the door, listening in the corridor and heard only the faintest echo of a snore, probably Dunka. Adjuring her fire lizards to silence, she walked noiselessly down the steps to the bathing rooms at the back of the first level. She'd always heard of the thermal pools at the big holes and weir, but this was her first experience with them. The fire lizards came clustering in behind her, and she hushed their excited twitterings at the sight of the waist-high trough of steaming water. Mentally dipped her fingers in the pleasant warm water, checked to see if there were sand soap, and then, throwing her clothes on the floor, slipped into the bath. The water was delightfully warm and soft to her skin, a change from the harsh sea or the mineral-heavy water in half-circle sea-hold. Mentally submerged completely and came up, shaking her hair. She'd washed all over. One of the others pushed Auntie too into the bath, and she let out a high-pitched squeal of protest and fright, then paddled happily about in the warm water. The next thing Mentally knew, all the fire lizards were splashing about, their talons unexpectedly catching her bare skin or tangling in her hair. She hushed them often and sternly because she wasn't sure how far noise carried from the bathing room. All she'd need after last night was for Dunca to come charging in, roused from her night's rest by her least wanted guests. Mentally sand-soaked all the fire lizards thoroughly, rinsed them well, got herself, her hair, and finally her clothes well washed, then got back to her room without anyone the wiser for her early morning activity. She was oiling a rough patch on Mimic's back when she heard the first stirrings outside, the cheery greetings of the herdsmen going to attend their beasts, who would be hold-bound today with Threadfall due. She wondered how fall would affect the business of the Harper Hall. Probably the apprentices and journeymen were required to assist the holders in flamethrower details. Thank goodness no one had asked her what she'd done after fall in half circle. She heard the slamming of a door below and decided that Dunca was up. Mentally slipped into her only other clothes, the patched tunic and trousers of her cave days. They were at least clean and neat. They were not, however, it was pointed out to Mentally at the breakfast table, suitable attire for a young lady living in Dunca's cot. When Mentally explained that she had only the one other change, which was now drying, Dunca let out a shriek of outrage and demanded to know where the clothes were drying. Mentally was emphatically told that she had committed yet another unwitting sin by hanging her washing, like the commonest field worker, on the window ledge. She was ordered to bring down the offending garments, still damp, and shown by the fuming Dunca where such laundry was to be hung in the inner recesses of the cot, when Mentally was sure they would take days to dry and smell musty besides, with no air to freshen them. Very much aware of her disgrace and destitute condition, Mentally finished her breakfast as quickly as possible, but when she rose from the table, Dunca demanded to know where she thought she was going. I must feed my fire lizards, Dunca, and I was told to report to Master Domic this morning. No message was received by me to such effect. Dunca drew herself up in officious disbelief. Master Domic told me yesterday. He made no mention of such instructions to me. Dunca's manner implied that Mentally was making up the order, probably because yesterday's message went astray. And while Dunca stammered and stuttered, Mentally slipped out of the room and out of the cot, trotting across the road, the fire lizards gracefully swirling above her head until they were sure she was headed towards the Harper Hall. Then they disappeared. They were perched on the window ledges when she reached the kitchen corner, their eyes whirling readily in anticipation of breakfast. They seemed to be more than the usual amount of confusion in the kitchen, but Camo, once he caught sight of her, immediately put down the side of herd beast he'd been lugging and left the carcass, its legs obscenely dropping across the passage, while he disappeared back into the storeroom. He emerged with yet a bigger bowl, scraps spilling down its sides as he jogged to meet her. Suddenly he gave a startled cry, and Mentally, peering in the window, saw that Abuna, wooden spoon upraised, was chasing after him. He slithered by, but her dress got caught on the extruding legs of the carcass. Mentally ducked into the space between the windows, fervently hoping that Camo's preoccupation with the feeding of the fire lizards was not going to cause a major breach with Abuna. There might be nothing to fear from Harper's, but the women in the Harper Hall were certainly possible enemies. Mentally, am I too late? Pimer came charging across the courtyard from the apprentice dormitory, his boots half fastened, his tunic laces untied, and his face and hair showing signs of half-hearted washing. Before he could assemble his clothing properly, Rocky, Lazy, and Mimic attached themselves to him. Camo came out of the kitchen to be assaulted by his three, and the three humans were exhorted by shrill, hungry Creelings to be fed. Camo's great bowl was finally emptied, and as if on cue, Abuna's voice rose to command Camo back to his duties. Meneley hurriedly thanked the man and pushed him urgently down the kitchen steps, assuring him that he'd saved quite enough food for the pretties, that the pretties could not stuff in another mouthful. When the breakfast gong sounded, Meneley stayed in the kitchen corner until the courtyard was cleared of the hungry harpers. She had to see Master Domic, for which interview she would need her guitar. She went to the arch room to collect it and lingered there, since everyone was still eating. She tuned the guitar, delighting afresh in its rich, sweet tone. She attempted some of the bridges from the music she played in the abortive lesson with the girls, stretching and stretching against the pull of the scar until her hand muscles went into a spasm of cramping. All of a sudden she remembered her other chore, to check the fire lizard eggs. But if the Master Harper were still asleep, no way of telling from here, she ran lightly down the steps, pleased that her feet were less stiff and tender this morning. She paused in the main hall, listening. She heard the distinctive sound of the Master Harper's voice at the round table, so she hurried up the steps and down the corridor to his room. The fire lizard pots were warm on the side away from the fire, so they'd obviously just been turned. She uncovered each egg and checked the shells for hardness, for any sign of cracking or striation. They were fine. She gently covered them with sand and replaced the lids. As she emerged from the Master Harper's rooms, she heard Master Domic's voice on the steps. With him were Siebel, carrying a small harp, and Talmor, guitar slung across his back. "There she is," Siebel said. "You checked the eggs, Meneley?" "I did, sir. They're fine." "Come this way, then. Step lively now, if you can," Domic said, frowning as he belatedly recalled her disability. "My feet are nearly as good as new now, sir," she told him. "Well, you're not to run any races with thread today. Here?" Meneley wasn't certain, as she followed the three men into the study, if Domic were teasing her or not. He sounded so sour. It was difficult to tell, but Siebel caught her eye and winked. Domic's study, well lit by huge baskets of glows, was dominated by the biggest sand table Meneley had ever seen, with all its spaces glass covered. Though she politely averted her eyes from the inscriptions, Domic might not like people peering at his music. The shelves were jammed with loose record hides and thin, white bleached sheets of some substance, evenly cut along the edges. She tried to get a closer look at them, but Master Domic called her to attention by telling her to take the middle stool. Siebel and Talmor were already settling themselves before the music rack and tuning their instruments, so she took her place and cast a quick glance at the music before them. With a thrill of surprise, she saw that it was for 4 instruments and no easy read. "You're to play second guitar, Meneley," Domic said, with the smile of one who was conferring a favor. He picked up a metal pipe with finger stops, one of the flutes that Petrion had told her were used by more accomplished pipers. She politely suppressed her curiosity, but she couldn't control her delighted surprise when Domic ran a test scale. It sounded like a fire lizard's voice. "You'll need to look through the music," he said, observing her interest. "I will?" Master Domic cleared his throat. "It is customary with music you've never seen before." He tapped the music with his pipe. "That," and his tone was very acid, "is no children's exercise, despite your display for Talmor yesterday. You will not find this easy to read." Rebuked, she skimmed the music, trying an alternative chording in one measure to see which would be easier on her hand at that tempo. The complexity of the chording was so fascinating that she forgot she was keeping 3 harpers waiting. "I beg your pardon," she turned the music back to the beginning and looked at Domic for him to give them the beat. "You're ready?" "I think so, sir." "Just like that?" "Sir?" "Very well, young woman, at the beat." And Domic sternly tapped out the time with a strong stamp. It had been fun, always, for Meneley to play with Petrion, particularly when he let her improvise around his melody. It had been a pleasure yesterday to see new music in Talmor's lesson, but now the stimulation of playing with 3 keen and competent musicians gave her such impulsion that she seemed to be an irrelevant medium for fingers that had to play what her eager eyes saw. She was lost completely in the thrall of the music, so that when the rushing finale ended, she suffered a shock of keen as pain. Oh, that was marvelous. Could we play it again? Talmor burst out laughing. Dominic stared at her, and Siebel covered his eyes with his hands as he bowed his head over his harp. I didn't believe you, Talmor, Dominic said, shaking his head, and I'd played with her myself. True, only basic things. I didn't think she was up to any demanding standard. Mentally inhaled sharply, worried that she had somehow erred, as she had with the girls the previous day. And I know, Dominic went on in that tight, dry tone, that you can't ever have seen that piece of music before. Mentally stared at the master. It was fascinating. The interweaving of melody from flute to harp and guitar. I'm sorry about this section. And she flipped back the sheets. I should have used your chords, but my hand. Dominic stared at her until her voice trailed off. Did Siebel warn you what would happen this morning? No, sir, only to say that I mustn't fail to come today. Enough, Dominic. The child's worried sick that she's done something wrong. Well, you have it, mentally, Talmor said, patting her hand encouragingly. You see, he went on, glaring in a good-natured fashion at Dominic, he just finished writing it. You've played the fingers off Siebel and me. Domic's panting for breath, and you've managed to plow through one of Domic's torturous inventions with, well, I did hear one faulty chording besides the one you just pointed out, but as you say, your hand. Now Siebel lifted his head and mentally stared at him because his eyes were overflowing with tears. But at the same time, he was laughing. Convulsed with mirth, he wagged an impotent finger at Dominic, unable to speak. Dominic batted irritably at Siebel's hand and glared at both journeymen. That's enough. All right, so the joke's on me, but you'll have to admit that there was good precedent for my skepticism. Anyone can play solo. He turned on the bewildered Menely. Did you play a great deal with Petrian or any of the other musicians at Half Circle? There was only Petrian who could play properly. Fishing leaves a man's hands too stiff for any fine music. She flicked a glance at Siebel. There were a few drummers and stickmen. Her reply set Siebel laughing again. He hadn't seemed the sort, mentally thought, being so calm and quiet. To be sure, he was laughing without roaring, but suppose you tell me exactly what you did do at Half Circle, Seahold mentally. Musically, that is. Master Robinton's been too busy to confide with me at any length. Domic's words implied that he had the right to know whatever it was she might tell Master Robinton, and she saw Siebel nodding his head in permission. So she thought for a moment. Would it be proper now to tell the Harpers that she had taught the children after Petrian had died and before the new Harper had come? Yes, because Harper Elgian must have told Master Robinton, and he hadn't chided her for stepping into a man's duties. Further, Master Dominic had taunted her with telling the truth once before. Rather than antagonize him for any reason, she had best be candid now. So she spoke of her situation at Half Circle Seahold, how Petrian had singled her out when she was old enough to learn her teaching ballads and sagas. He had taught her to play guitar and harp to help with the teaching, she assured her listeners, and with the evening singing, Dominic nodded, and now Petrian had shown her all the music he had, but he'd only 3 pieces of occasional music because he had said there wasn't need for more. Giannis, the seaholder, wanted music to sing, not listen to. Naturally, Dominic replied, nodding again, and Petrian had taught her how to cut and hoe reeds to make pipes, to stretch skin on dragon frames, large and small, the principles involved in making a guitar or small harp, but there was no hardwood in the sea hold for another harp, and no real need for Menely to have either harp or guitar. 2 turns ago, however, she'd had to take over the playing of the teaching because Petrian's hands had become crippled with the knuckle disease. And then, of course, and now Menely felt the lump of grief rising in her throat. She'd done all the teaching when Petrian had died because Giannis realized that the young must be kept up in their teaching ballads and songs, since he knew his duty to the weir, and she was the only person in the hold who could be spared from the fishing. Of course, Dominic had said, and when you cut your hand? Oh, the new Harper Elgian had arrived, so I wasn't required to play any more, and besides, she held her hand up explanatorily, not interplanatorily, explanatorily. It was thought I'd never be able to play again. She wasn't conscious of the silence at first, her head bent, her eyes on her hand, rubbing the scar with her right thumb because the intensive playing had caused it to ache again. When Petrion was here at the hold, there was no finer musician, no better instructor, Master Domic said quietly. I had the good fortune to be his apprentice. You've no need to ever be ashamed of your playing. Or of your joy in music, Siebel added, no laughter in his eyes now as he leaned towards her. Joy in music. His words were like a release. How could he have known so acutely? Now that you're here at the Harper Hall, Meneley, what would you like to best to do? Master Domic asked her, his tone so casual, so neutral that Meneley couldn't think what answer he expected of her. Joy in music. How could she express that? In writing the kind of songs Master Robinson needed? How would she know what he needed? And hadn't Talmor said that Domic had composed the magnificent quartet they had just played? Why did Master Robinson need another composer if he'd already had Domic in the hall? You mean play or sing or teach? Master Domic widened his eyes and regarded her with a half smile. If that's what you wish. I'm here to learn, aren't I? She avoided his taunt. Domic acknowledged that that was true enough. So I'll learn the things I haven't had the chance to learn before because Petrion told me there were a lot of things he couldn't teach me, like how to use my voice properly. That's going to take a lot of hard work with Master Shonagar. He only lets me breathe and sing 5-note scales. Talmor grinned so broadly at her, his eyes dancing as if he knew so exactly her feelings that she took encouragement from him. I'd really love. Then she hesitated because of what Domic might say, and she dreaded his clever-edged tongue. What do you really want, Meneley? Asked Siebel kindly. You're frightening her, Domic, Talmor said at the same time. Nonsense! Are you frightened of me, Meneley? He sounded surprised. It's having to train idiots that sours me, Meneley, said Master Domic, but his voice was suddenly gentler. Now tell me, what facet of music appeals to you most? He caught her gaze and would not release her eyes, but his phrasing had given her the answer. What appeals to me most? Why, playing this, like this, in a group. She got the words out in a rush, gesturing at the rack in front of her. It's so beautiful. It's such a challenge to hear the interweaving harmonies and the melody line changing from instrument to instrument. I felt as if I was flying on a dragon. Domic looked startled and blinked, a slow, pleased smile lighting his otherwise dour face. She means it, Domic, Taylor said in a pause that followed. Oh, I do. It's the most exciting thing I've ever played. Only what? Urged Talmor when she faltered. I didn't play it right. I should have studied the music longer before I started playing because I was so busy watching the notes and time changes that I couldn't follow the dynamic markings. I am sorry. Dominic brought his hand against his forehead in an exasperated smack. Siebel dissolved again into his quiet laughter, but Talmor just howled, slapping his knee and pointing at Dominic. In that case, Meneley, we will play it again, Dominic said, raising his voice to drown the amusement of the others. And this time, he frowned at Meneley, an expression which no longer distressed her because she knew that she had touched him. Watching those dynamic signs, which I put in for very good reason. Now, on the beat. And they did not play the music through. Domic stopped them time and again, insisting on a retard here, a variation of the designated time here, a better balance of the instruments in another section. In some respects, this was as satisfying as playing for Meneley, since Domic's comments gave her insights to the music as well as its composer. Siebel had been right about her studying with Domic. She had a lot to learn from a man who could write music like this, pure music. Then Talmor began to argue interpretation with Domic, an argument cut short by the eerie sound that began softly and increased in volume and intensity so that it was almost unbearable in the closed room. Abruptly, her fire lizards appeared. How did they get in here like that? Talmor demanded, hunching his shoulders to protect his head as the study got overcrowded with nervous fire lizards. They're like dragons, you know, Siebel said, equally wary of claw and wing. Tell those creatures to settle down, Beneley, commanded Domic. The noise bothers them. That's only the threadfall alarm, said Domic, but the men were putting down their instruments. Meneley called her fire lizards to order, and they settled on the shelves, their eyes wheeling with alarm. Wait here, Meneley, Dominic said as he and the others made for the door. We'll be back. That is, I will. And I too, said the others, and then they all stamped out of the room. Meneley sat uneasy, aware that the hall was preparing for Threadfall, as she prepared for the menace of her conscious years. As she prepared for the menace all her conscious years. Okay. Sorry, she heard racing feet in the corridors, for the door was half ajar, then the clanging of shutters, the squeal of metal, many shouts of the gradual compression of air in the room, the sudden throb of the great ventilation fans of the hall were set into motion for the duration of Threadfall. Once again she found herself wishing to be back in the safety of her seaside cave. She had always hated being closed in at Half Circle's sea hole during Threadfall. There never seemed to be enough air to breathe during those fear-filled times. The cave, safe but with a reassuringly clear view of the sea, had been a perfect compromise between security and convention. Beauty chirped inquiringly and then sprang from the shelf to Meneley's shoulder. She wasn't nervous at being closed in, but she was very much aware of Thread's imminence. Her slim body taut, her eyes whirling. The clatter and clangs, the shouts and stampings ceased. Meneley heard the low murmur of men's voices on the steps as Dominic and the two journeymen returned. Granted that your left hand won't do octave stretches yet, Dominic said, addressing Meneley, but more as if he were continuing a conversation begun with the two journeymen. How much harp instruction did Petrian give you? He had one small floor harp, sir, but we'd such a desperate time getting new wires, so I sort of learned to improvise, asked Siebel, extending his harp to her. She thanked him and politely preferred the guitar in its place, which he, with equal grave courtesy, accepted. Dominic had been rifling through music on the shelves and brought over another score, worn and faded in spots, but legible enough, he said, for the purpose. Meneley rubbed her fingertips experimentally. She'd lost most of the harp string calluses, and her fingers would be sore, but perhaps. She looked up at Dominic and received permission, plucking an arpeggio. Siebel's harp was a joy to use, the tones singing through the frame, held between her knees, like liquid sound. She had to shift her fingers awkwardly to make the octave run. Despite the fact that her scar made her wince more than once, she became so quickly involved in the music that the discomfort could be ignored. She was a bit startled when she reached the final octave and that the others had been playing along with her. Finale. In the slow section, she asked, is the major seventh chord accented throughout? The notation doesn't say. Whether it is or not must wait for another day, Dominic said, firmly taking the harp from her and handing it back to Siebel. You'll live to play harp another time, Meneley. No more now. He turned her left hand over so she was forced to notice that the scar had split and was bleeding slightly from the tear. But, Dominic interrupted her more gently than he usually spoke, it's time to eat. Everyone has to eat sometime, Meneley. They were all grinning at her, and emboldened by the rapport she'd had with them during their practice, she smiled back. Now she smelled the aroma of roasted meat and spices and was mildly astonished to feel her stomach churning with hunger. To be sure, she hadn't eaten much in the cot, with everyone glaring at her so. Some of her elation with the morning's satisfying work was dampened by the realization that she'd have to sit with the girls. But that was a small blemish on the pleasure of the hours gone past. To her surprise, however, there were no girls at the hearth table, and the great metal doors of the hall were locked tight, the windows shuttered, the dining hall lit by the great central and corner baskets of glows. In some obscure way, the hall looked more friendly than she'd seen it before. Everyone else was seated, though her quick glance did not show Master Robinson to be in his customary place at the round table. Master Morshaw was and frowned at her until Master Dominic gave her a shove towards her place as he drew out his own guitar. Siebel and Talmor seemed in no way abashed as they went late to the oval journeymen's tables, but Meneley felt more conspicuous than ever as she walked awkwardly toward the hearth table, and it wasn't her imagination. Every eye in the room was on her. Hey, Meneley, said a familiar voice in a harsh but carrying whisper. Hurry up so we can get fed. She saw Pimer slapping the empty chair place beside him. See? he said to his neighbor. I told you she would be hiding in the hold with the others. Then he added, under the cover of the noise of everyone taking their seats, you aren't afraid of Thread, are you? Why should I be? Meneley was being truthful, but it obviously stood her in good credit with the boys near enough to her to hear her reply. And I thought you said you weren't supposed to sit at the girls' table. They're not here, are they? And you and you said you wanted someone to talk to, so here I am. Meneley, asked the boy with the protuberant eyes who usually sat opposite her, do fire lizards breathe fire like dragons and go after Thread? Meneley glanced at Pimer to see if he were back of the question. He shrugged innocence. Mine never have, but they're young. I told you so, Brawley, replied Pimer. Dragonettes in the weir don't fight Thread, and fire lizards are just small dragons, right, Meneley? They do seem to be, she said, temporizing. I've never heard that word. Temporizing slightly, but neither debater noticed. Then where are they now? Brawley wanted to know, slightly sneering. In Master Domic's study. The meat reached them, and further discussion was suspended. Today, Meneley blithely speared 4 slices of juicy meat to her plate. She reached for bread, beating Brawley's grab for some, and she dished Pimer some of the red roots, which he wasn't going to take. He was much too small not to eat properly. Whether it was Pimer's company or the absence of the girls, or both, Meneley didn't know, but suddenly she was included in the table conversations. The boys opposite her had questions after question about her fire lizards, how she had accidentally discovered the queen's clutch in the sand, how she'd saved the hatchlings from destruction by Thread, how she had found enough food to support their voracious appetites, how she'd dragged a wherry from the mire to provide oil for her fire lizards' patchy skins. She sensed that the boys gradually became reconciled to her possession of so many fire lizards because it was obviously no gather day to take care of them. They had the most bizarre theories about fire lizards and a few unsubtle queries about when would her queen fly to mate and how soon would there be a clutch and how many in it. The masters and journeymen would get first crack anyhow, Pimer said, disgruntled. It ought to be free choice, the way of dragons choose their riders, said Brawley. Fire lizards aren't quite the same as dragons, Brawley, said Pimer, glancing at Meneley for support. Look at Lord Grau. What dragon would have picked him if it had another choice? The boys shushed him, glancing nervously about to see if anyone had overheard his indiscreet remark. The weirs have control of the fire lizards any road, said Brawley. You can just bet the weirs are going to hand 'em out where they'll keep the lord holders and craft masters happy. Meneley sighed for the truth of that surmise. Yes, but you can't make a fire lizard stay with you if you're mean to him, said Pimer flatly. I heard that Lord Mirren's disappeared for days. Where do they go? Asked Brawley, as Meneley didn't know. She was just as glad that the eerie sound which Domic had said was the Thread alarm sounded, effectively ending the conversation. That means Thread is directly over us, said Pimer, hunching his shoulders and pointing toward the ceiling. Look at that! And Brawley's startled exclamation made everyone turn about. On the mantel behind her were ranged all 9 fire lizards, their eyes sparkling with rainbow reflections of intense agitation, their wings spread, talons unsheathed. They were hissing, retracting and extending their tongues as if licking imaginary thread from the air. Meneley half rose, glancing towards the round table. She saw Domic nodding permission to her as he too got to his feet. She was gesturing to someone at the journeymen's tables. The alarm chorus would be appropriate, Brudigan, he called as he crossed to the hearth, a wary eye on the fire lizards. Meneley motioned to Beauty, but the little queen ignored her, rising to her haunches, and started to keen a piercing series of notes, up and down, an almost inaudible high octave. The others joined her. For the sake of our ears, Meneley, can you get your creatures to sing with the chorus now? Brudigan, where's your beat? Feet began to stamp 1, 2, 3, 4, and suddenly the fire lizard's keen was covered by the mass chorus. Beauty fanned her wings in surprise, and Mimic back-winged himself off the mantel, only missing a drop to the floor by claws biting into the wood. Drummer beat and piper blow, harper strike and soldier go, sang the massed voices. Menely joined in, singing directly to the fire lizard. She was aware of Brudigan, then Siebel and Talmor coming to stand beside her, but facing the boys. Brudigan directed, cueing in the parts, the descant on the refrain. Above the male voices, pure and piercingly thrilling, rang the fire lizard's tone, weaving their own harmonies about the melody. The last triumphant note echoed through the corridors of the Harper Hall, and from the doorway to the outer hall there came a sigh of pleasure. Menely saw the kitchen drudges, and utterly entranced Camo among them, standing there, every face wreathed with smiles. I'd say that a rendition of Moretta's Ride might be in order if you think your friends would oblige us, Rudigan said, with a slight bow to Menely and a gesture to take his place. Beauty, as if she understood what had been said, gave a complacent chirp. JJ, can I have my water? Blinking the first lids across her eyes so that those nearest laughed. That startled her, and she fanned her wings as if scolding them for impudence. That prompted more laughter, but Beauty was now watching Menely. Give the beat, Menely, said Brudigan, and because his manner indicated that he expected her obedience, she raised her hands and sketched the time. Second. Okay, it has a lid, so everything's more difficult. Thanks, guys. Okay. The chorus responded at the upstroke, and she experienced a curious sense of power as she realized that these voices were hers to direct. Beauty led the fire lizards in another dizzy climb of sound, but they sang the melody octaves above the baritones who introduced the first stanza of the ballad to the muted humming of the other parts. The baritones, Menely felt, were not really watching her. She signaled for more intensity because, after all, the ballad told her of a tragedy. The singers gave more depth to their part. Menely had often led the evening sings at the half-circle Seahold, so conducting was not new to her. It was the quality of the singers, their responsiveness to her signals, that made as much difference as chalk from cheese. Once the baritones had finished telling of the dread sickness in the land which had struck with incredible speed across the breadth of Pern, the full chorus quietly introduced the refrain. Moretta secluded with her queen, Orlith, who is about to clutch at Fort Weir, while the healers from all holds and weirs try to isolate the form of the disease and find a cure. The tenors take up the narration with increasing intensity, the basses and baritones emphasizing the plight of the land, herd beasts left untended, wearies breaking into crops as holders, crafters, dragonfolk alike are consumed by the dreaded fever. Oh. So, in other words, COVID, only out of control. Okay, a bass singer, because COVID's not, I'm not going to go there. Okay, a bass singer, the solo of Capiam, master healer of Pern, who isolates the illness and suggests its cure. Those dragon riders who are still able to stay on their beasts fly to the rainforests of Nabol and Ista to find and deliver to Capiam the all-important seeds that contain the cure, some riders dying with the effort as they complete their task. We need some seeds from the rainforest. Okay. A dialogue between baritone Capiam and the soprano, Moretta, was sung. Menely was only vaguely cognizant by Pimer. Excitement builds as Moretta, once Orlith has clutched, is the only healthy dragon rider at the fort and one of the few immune to the disease. It is up to her to deliver the medicine. Moretta, pushing herself and her queen to the limits of their endurance, flies between, from hold to hold, craft hall to cot, from weir to weir, the final verse, a dirge with keening descant, this time so appropriately rendered by the fire lizards that mentally waved the humans silent, ended in the sorrowful farewell of a world to its heroines as Orlith, the dying Moretta on her back, seeks the oblivion of between. Such a deep silence followed the soft final chord that mentally shook off the spell of the song with difficulty. I wonder if we could ever repeat that again, Brudigan said slowly, thoughtfully after a further moment of almost unendurable silence. A sigh of release from the thrall of the music spread through the hall. "It's the fire lizard," said the very soft voice of the usually impudent Pimer. "You're right, Pimer," Brutigan replied, considering the suggestion, and there was a murmur of assent from the others. Menelly had taken a seat, her knees shaking and her insides gripped by a rhythmic shuddering. She took a sip of the claw remaining in her cup. Cold or not, it helped. "Menelly, do you think they'd sing like that again?" Brutigan asked, dropping to a bench beside her. Menelly blinked at him, as much because she hadn't had time to recover from the extraordinary experience of directing a trained group as because he, a journeyman, was asking the advice of the newest arrival in the Harpercraft Hall. "They sang fine with me yesterday, sir," said Pimer. Then he giggled. "Menelly told Master Shonagar that it's hard to keep 'em quiet when you don't want 'em singing. Right, Menelly?" Pimer chortled again, all his impudence revived. "That's what happened the other morning, sir, when you didn't know who was singing." To Menelly's relief, Brutigan laughed heartily, evidently reconciled. Menelly managed a shy, apologetic smile for that untoward incident, but the chorus leader was watching the fire lizards now. They were preening their wingtips or glancing about the room at all the people, oblivious to the sensation they had just caused. "Pretty sing pretty." Okay, hold on. Sorry. Everybody lay down. No, why are you up?
Look, I wanted to show them my mom because I finished.
When I'm done. JJ, lay down. I lost my place. Lay down. You should. Okay, we got several pages left.
Oh no, this is my room, by the way.
Pretty sing pretty, said Camo, appearing beside Menelly and Brutigan, a pitcher of steaming claw in one hand. He poured some into each empty cup, and then Menelly noticed that the drink was being served throughout the hall. "You like their singing, eh, Camo?" asked Brutigan, taking a judicious sip from his mug. "Sing higher than Pimer here, and he's got the best voice we've had in many a turn." As if he didn't know it, Brutigan reached across the table to ruffle Pimer's hair. "Pretty sing again?" asked Camo plaintively. "They can sing any time they like for all of me," Brutigan replied, nodding to Menelly. "But right now I want to get some practice done. We've that big chorale work to polish properly before Lord Grav's entertainment." With a sigh, he pushed himself to his feet and tapped an empty claw pot for silence. "Don't stop them if they feel like singing, Menelly," he added, inclining his head towards the fire lizards. "Now, then, you lot, we'll begin with the tenor solo. Fessnall, if you please," and Brutigan pointed to one of the journeymen, who rose to his feet. Listening to the rehearsal was not quite the same involving experience as directed. Then Menelly had felt herself to be an extension of the choral group. Now she found it objectively interesting to observe Brutigan's direction, and to think what she would do with the same passages. About the time she decided that he was an exceptionally clever director, she realized that she'd been setting herself in comparison with a man in every way superior in experience and training. Menelly almost laughed out loud, yet, she reflected, this was what life should be in a Harper Hall. Music, morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. She couldn't have enough of it, and yet she could now see the logic of afternoons spent on other chores. Her fingertips ached from the harp strings, and her scar felt hot and pulsed. She massaged her hand, but that was too painful. She'd left the jar of numbweed in the cot, which meant she'd have to wait until after Threadfall to get easement. She wondered if the girls knew what went on in the Harper Hall during Threadfall. Hadn't Pimer said they were up at the hole during fall? Yeah. She shrugged. She was far happier to be here. Once more, the eerie alarm cut through her other sounds. Rudigan abruptly ended the practice, thanking his chorus members for their attention and hard work. Then he stood back politely as a tall, older journeyman walked quietly to the fireplace, raising his hands unnecessarily for attention. Everyone remembers his duties now, there was a murmur of assent. Good. As soon as the doors are open, join your sections. With luck and Fort Weir's usual efficiency, we'll be back in the hall by supper time. I've meat rolls for the outside crews, announced Sylvina, standing up at the round table. Camo, take the tray and stand by the door. The second weird hooting, and then, or a second weird hooting, and then the clang and ring of metal and a ponderous creaking. Mentally half wished that she were in a position to see the hall doors working as light began to flood the outer hallway. A cheer went up, and the boys surged towards the entrance, some going across the tide to take meat rolls from Camo's patiently held tray. Then the dining hall shutters clanked back, the afternoon sunlight an assault on eyes accustomed to the softer illumination from glow baskets. Here they come, rose the shout, and the flow towards the doors became a scramble despite the attempts of masters and journeymen to keep an orderly pace. We can see as well from the windows. Mentally, come on, Pimer tugged at her sleeve. The fire lizards reacted to the excitement, streaking through the open windows. Mentally saw the spiral of dragons descending in wings to the ground beyond the hall courtyard. Truly, they made a magnificent sight. The sky seemed to be as clogged with dragons as just recently it must have been with Thread. The boys let out a cheer and mentally saw the dragon riders lifting their arms in response to the hooray. She might have lost her fear of Thread, of being caught out holdless, but she would never lose that lift of heart at the sight of the great dragons who protected all Pern from the ravages of Thread. Mentally! She whirled at the sound of her name and saw Sylvina standing there, a slight frown creasing her wide forehead. For the first time since morning, Mentally wondered what she had done wrong now. Mentally, has nothing been forwarded to you from Bendon Weir in the way of clothes? I know that Master Robinson dragged you out of there with scant time to assemble yourself. Mentally could say nothing, realizing that Dunca had complained about her tattered trousers to Sylvina. The head woman was giving her clothes a keen scrutiny. Well, for once, said and Sylvina's admission was grudging. Dunca is right. Your clothes are worn to the woof. Can't have that. You'll give the Harpercraft a bad name. Wandering about in rags, however attached to them you may be. Sylvina, great shells, child, I'm not angry with you. And Sylvina took Menelie's chin firmly in her hand and made her look her in eye to eye. I'm furious with myself for not thinking, not to mention giving that Junka a chance to snip at you. Only one, don't go repeating that. Please, for Junka's useful to me in her own way. Not that I talk much anyhow. Not that you talk much anyhow, sorry. Haven't heard you put two sentences together yet. There now, what have I said to distress you? You just come along with me. And Sylvina took Menelie's firmly by the elbow and marched her towards the complex of storage rooms at the back of the Harper Hall of the kitchen on the kitchen level. There's been so much excitement these days, I haven't any more wit about me than Camo. But then every apprentice is supposed to come with two decent sets of clothing, new or nearly new, so it never occurred to me. And you having come from Bendon Weir, I thought, though you weren't there long enough, now were you? Felina gave me the skirt and tunic, and they took my measure for boots. And Master Robinson threw you a dragon back before you could say a word. Well, now, let's just see. And Sylvana unlocked a door, flipped open a glow basket to illuminate a storeroom stacked from floor to ceiling with bolts of cloth, clothing, boots, hides made of or uncut, sleeping furs, and rolls of tapestries and rugs. She gave Mentally another appraising look, turning from her side to side. We've more that's suitable for boys and men from the Weaver and Tanner halls. I'd really prefer trousers. Sylvina chuckled kindly. You're lanky enough to wear them well, I must say, and since you're to be using instruments, trousers will be handier than skirts. But you ought to have some finery, child. It does lift the spirit, and there's gathers. She was sorting through folded skirts of black and brown, which she replaced disdainfully. Now this, and she pulled out a bolt of rich, dark red fabric. That's too fine for me. You'd have You'd have me dress you in a drudge's colors? Even they have something good. Sylvina was scornful. You may not be proud in yourself mentally. In point of fact, your modesty has done you great service, but you will kindly consider the change in your circumstances. You are not the youngest child in a family of an isolated sea-hold. You are an apprentice harper, and we, Sylvina tapped her chest smartly with her fingers, have appearances to maintain. You will dress yourself as well as, and if I've my way, better than, those fumble-fingered females or those musical midgets who will never be more than senior apprentices or very junior journeymen. Now a rich red will become you. Ah, yes, this will suit you well, she said, holding the red up against Menelly's shoulder. Until I can have that made up, trousers will have to do. And she held up a pair of dark blue hide pants to Menelly's waist. You're all leg. And here. She shoved a pair of close-woven blue-green trousers at Menelly. This should match the leather pants, and it does, she said, tossing to Menelly a dark blue jerkin. Put that lot on the chest there, and try on this weir-hide jacket. Yes, that's not too bad a fit, is it? Here's a hat and gloves, and tunics. Now these, and from another chest Sylvina extracted breastbands and underpants, snorting as she passed them to Menelly. Junka was quite incensed that you'd no underthings at all. Sylvina's amusement ended as she saw Menelly's face. Why ever are you looking so stricken? Because you wore your underthings out? Or because Dunca's pride Dunca's pride into your affairs? You can't honestly be worried about what that fat old fool thinks or says or does. Yes, you can, and you are, and you would. Sylvina pushed Menelly backwards until she sat abruptly on the chest behind her, while Sylvina, hands on her hips, regarded her with a curiously intense expression. I think, said Sylvina slowly, in a very gentle voice, that you have lived too much alone, and not just in that cave. And I think you must have been terribly bereft when old Père died. He seems to have been the only one in your hold who understood what's in you, though why he left it so long to tell Master Robinson I simply don't understand. Well, in a way I do, but that's neither here nor there. One thing's certain, you're not staying out or on in that cot. Not another night. Oh, but Sylvina, don't oh, but Sylvina, me, the woman said sharply, but her expression was mocking, not stern. Don't think I've missed Pona's little tricks, or Dunca's. No, the cot is the wrong place for you. I thought so when you first arrived, but there were other reasons for plunking you there first. So, we'll take the long view, as should be done, and shift you here. Old Ive doesn't want you on your feet so much, and sure as fall'll come again, the fire lizards are as unhappy at Junca's as she is to have them. The old fool. No, Menelly, and now Sylvina was angry with Menelly. She was angry with Menelly. It is not your fault. Besides which, as a full Harper apprentice, you really haven't anything to do with the paying students. Further, you ought to be near those fire lizard eggs until they hatch. So you're staying here in the hall, and that's the end of the matter. Sylvina got to her feet. Let's just gather these clothes, and we'll settle you right now, back in the room you had the first night. It's handy to the Harpers and all. That's much too grand a place for me. Sylvina gave her a droll look. I could, of course, move all the furniture out, take down the hangings, and give you an apprentice's cot and a fold stool. I'd feel better about it. Sylvina stared at her so that Menelly broke off, flustered. Why, you numbwit! You think I meant that? Didn't you? Because the things in that room, are far too valuable for an apprentice. Sylvina was still staring at her. Having 9 fire lizards is causing everyone trouble. The room should be just grand, and if I've only the furnishings of any other apprentice, why, that's proper, isn't it? Sylvina gave her one more long, appraising look, shaking her head and laughing to herself. You're right, you know. Then none of the others could quibble about the change. But an apprentice's cot is narrow, and you've the fire lizards to consider. 2 apprentice cots, if you have them to spare. Done. We'll tie the legs together and heap the rushes high, which is what they did. Without the rich hangings and heavy furniture, the chamber was echoingly empty. Menelly insisted that she didn't mind, but Sylvina said it wasn't up to her because was head woman in this hall. Hangings that Sylvina had removed for shabbiness were recovered from storage, and Menely was told that she could mend them when she had free time. Several small rugs were spread on the floor, a long table from the apprentice's study, with a leg mended after being damaged in a brawl, a bench, and a small press for storage gave the room some hominess. Sylvina said that the place looked heartlessly plain, but certainly no one could fault it for not displaying an apprentice's lowly state. Now then, that's settled. Yes, Pimer, you were looking for me? No, Sylvina, it's Menely I'm after, for Master Shanagar. She's dead late for her lesson. Nonsense, there's no regular lesson on a Threadfall day. He should know that as well as anyone, Sylvina said, taking Menely by the arm as he started to leave the room. That's what I told him, Sylvina, said Pimer, grinning from ear to ear. But he asked me when had Menely been assigned to a section, and of course I know she hasn't. So he said that she'd have nothing better to do with her time, so she'd better learn something constructive. So, and Pimer shrugged his helplessness in the face of such logic. Well, girl, you'd better go then. We're all settled here anyway, and you, Pimer, you pop over to Dunca's. Ask Godiva politely, too, you imp, to bundle up Menely's things, including the skirt and tunic Menely washed today. What else did you have there, Menely? Sylvina smiled as if she knew perfectly well that Menely was grateful not to have to return to the cot. Master Geraint has my pipe, so there's only the medicines. Off with you, Pimer, and mind you make sure it's Godiva. I'd have asked for her anyhow, Sylvina. Bold as brass you are, Sylvina called after him as he scampered down the steps. A good lad at heart. You've heard him sing? He's younger than I had liked to have them in the hall, but he does hold his own. Rascal that he is, and where else should he be with a glorious treble voice like that? Trouble. Planting tubers or herding the beasties? No, for such originals as Pimer and yourself, you're better here. Off with you now before Master Shanagar starts bellowing. We don't really need a Claxton with him in the hall, so we don't. Sylvina had walked Menely down the steps and now gave her a gentle shove towards the open hall doors as she turned towards the kitchen. Menely watched her for a moment, suffused by an inarticulate gratitude and affection for Sylvina's understanding. The woman wasn't at all like Petrian, and yet Menely knew that she could go to Sylvina as she had to Petrian when she was perplexed or in difficulties. Sylvina was like a storm anchor. Menely, trotting obediently across the yard to Master Shanagar, smiled at such a seemingly metaphor for a land-bound woman. Master Shanagar did roar and bellow and carry on, but, buoyed by Sylvina's courtesies, Menely took the berating in silence until he made her promise faithfully that whatever else happened to her during the morning hours, the afternoon was his. Otherwise, he'd never make a singer of her. So she was to report to him, please and thank you, through fall, fog, or fire, for how else was she to be a credit to his skill or the craft hall that had been pleased to exhibit its secrets for her edification and education. That is the end of chapter 6. And we are at 1 hour and 13 minutes, and I'm plumb worn out. I discovered this book in, Mom, help me out, was it 7th or 8th grade? This book series in 7th or 8th grade, and these words are huge. This can't be a 7th or 8th grade level. It has to be like, pick something. It has to be, well, anyway, they don't write them like this anymore. That's for sure. This is literature. It's not Captain Underpants. So let me see what the comments are. Granny Bear says, wow, Daniel. Last 2 chapters. Oh, no, wait, I thought there were 11.
No, we read 2 chapters.
Oh, right, for Daniel. Okay. I don't know. Come and show us your tank. Goodness. Just the one you finished. JJ, come say goodnight. Okay, chapter 7 is 246 to 271. So, can you show us?
Can you put it close to the camera? That's Commander. Then here's one of the soldiers.
Did you finish it?
Yeah.
You want to sit here?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, Easton, move. I'm surrounded by dogs.
Okay, so I started this like 2 days ago. Right, Dad?
Mhm.
2 days ago. I bought it like 2 days ago when I started it. Like, actually, I bought it like 3 days ago when I started it 2 days ago, and I've just finished it tonight. I did not use Gorilla Glue for this, like I did my last two, which were incredibly crusty and white. And anyway, this one has two figures. They're, I don't know, like figures or characters. I don't know, but anyway, this character, I don't know if you can see that. He has AK-47, I think, and a little backpack that I glued on. And he has a bottle for water, a dagger, and a grenade on his wait, on his right side. Wait, or left, I forget. Anyway, here's the tank. I haven't finished the tracks yet because I have to get like a hot screwdriver blade, like what's it called, a flathead. And anyway, I gotta flatten the little prongs that are sticking up for the like I gotta stick it together and then flatten the little prongs with a heated flathead screwdriver head. And I gotta melt it so that it sticks together. No, I don't. I don't.
What's in your mouth?
Okay.
That's
I love. Well, good night.
Jason has something he wants to share real quick too.
Hi guys. So I am reading a book. It's a book from where I was born. Right, Mom?
Yeah.
So this is a very old book. And Kim's probably gonna recognize it. So is Granny Bear or Kenny Stockton. But we are going to be reading it today. So, Mama, do you love me? Yes, I do, dear one. How much? I love you more than the raven loves his treasure, more than the dog loves his tail, more than the whale loves his spout. How long? I'll love you until the umiak flies into the darkness, until the stars turn to fish in the sky, and the puffin howls at the moon. Mama, what if I carried our eggs, our ptarmigan eggs, and I tried to be careful, and I tried to walk slowly, but I fell, and all the eggs broke. Then I would be sorry, but still I would love you. What if I put salmon in your parka, emimes in your mittens, and lemmings in your mucklucks? Then I would be angry, but still I love you. What if I threw water at our lamp? I forgot to show you this one. But what if I threw water at our lamp? Then dear one, I would be very angry. But still, I would love you. What if I ran away? Then I would be worried. What if I stayed away, sang with the wolves, and slept in the cave? Then, dear one, I would be very sad. But still, I would love you. Okay. What if I turned into a muskox? Then I would be surprised. What if I turned into a walrus? Then I'd be surprised and a little scared. Apparently, that's what a muskox, that's what it looks like. This is what a walrus looks like, obviously. What if I turned into a polar bear? And I was the meanest bear you ever saw. And I had sharp, shiny teeth, and I chased you into your tent, and you cried. Then, dear one, I would be very surprised and very scared. But still, inside the bear, you would be you, and I would love you. I will love you. I will love you forever and for always, because you are my dear one. I hope you guys loved that story. My mom actually thought of reading that story, but goodbye. Thank you for watching Heavy Storytelling. We are having a lot of fun with these puppies today. Yeah. Goodbye. Bye.